Welcome back, everybody. Here we are with issue 81, the review. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm not going to go entirely through this whole thing. Basically, the Hyena class is a beefed up version of the Vulture class, specifically designed to be a bomber. They were very successful and highly sought out by the generals of um, uh, the CIS, basically the bad guys within the Clone Wars. Um, but they were rare. They didn't have a lot because they came in towards the end of the Clone Wars. They were very much like the Vulture droids, where they could kind of transform and walk around. Um, but again, the Hyena class was uh, they were very well respected, and so much so that the Republic would go after them, so that way the Hyena class bombers would not impact um, their duties and their things, because they were very good at bombing the ground targets and all that kind of stuff. This part was kind of interesting where it talked about um, the CIS had brought in some hyenas to attack some of the Republic, and let's see if it talks about where it was. Yeah, it's probably the relative scarcity. So, oh, Malastare. So basically, what had happened was they brought him in, and they weren't able to do what they were supposed to do. So what they did was they basically did the old kamikaze thing, and so that was had a pretty big impact, and that was successful for them. But they ended up losing those hyenas, and so wasn't something that, as it says here, that tactic, while successful, was frowned upon because they were so rare. So let's go ahead and talk about the behind the scenes here, the online quest. The distinctive cousin of the more common Vulture droid, the Hyena Bomber, made an early appearance in the Star Wars universe in the online webcomic The Clone Wars Fall of Falcon, debuting in 2008 on StarWars.com. The story, written by Pablo Hidalgo and drawn by Tom Hodges, showed the bombers protecting separatist troops while they were being deployed on the world of Falcon. Later that year, LEGO would release the bomber as part of one of its Star Wars sets, before going on to feature it in its 2009 short film, The Quest for R2-D2. The bomber would appear regularly in the animated series The Clone Wars on Cartoon Network, but fans wouldn't learn its full name and designation until 2015 and the release of the Dorling candidate Kindersley Ultimate Star Wars. So there you go. Nal Hutta Nar Shaddaa. So, as I mentioned um, during the building portion, uh, Nar Shaddaa was actually mentioned by Han Solo while still on Hoth when he said, "Yeah, well, that bounty hunter on Nar Shaddaa kind of changed my mind," or something like that. So, definitely part of canon. Both are actually part of canon because of that, and then now Nal Hutta, they actually had it in the Clone Wars, which makes it part of canon as well. Let's go ahead and go through this. Rarely had a species' homeworld been so representative of its inhabitants as Nal Hutta. The home planet of the Hutts was a fetid, mist-shrouded swamp world, its humid climate maintained by a thick, slimy rain that fell almost perpetually. What precious little solid land there was had been claimed by the Hutts long ago and used to support their ugly homes. Nal Hutta received few visitors, most dealing with off-worlders being conducted on the orbiting moon of Nar Shaddaa, but the Hutts had built a handful of spaceports to connect their towns, settlements, and palaces. One place that did see more regular traffic was the Palace of Gardula the Hutt. Built into the supporting stone and organic matter of what resembled a giant fungal pod, the palace and the complex around it served as the occasional home to the Hutt Grand Council, the ruling body of the Hutt clan. Reached by spaceport or by swamp speeder, the palace was heavy and fortified and guarded. Bilbosa, in sight of the bulbous silhouette of Gardula's palace, was the sprawling mess that was Bilbosa, the foremost spaceport on Nal Hutta and the planet's capital. Covered in arching roots spreading out from looming bulbous pods, Bilbosa buildings were squat and uninspiring. But despite the thick, foul mist that clung to the whole planet, the city offered numerous outdoor cafes and eateries. Bilbosa's spaceport and market were places of low intrigue and sudden violence. The streets, such as they were awash with bounty hunters, mercenaries, and petty criminals, all hoping to work their way up the local power structure. Because of its proximity to Gardula's seat of power, the shops in the market stocked a surprising abundance of rare and unusual goods, while the spaceport did a roaring trade in second-hand vessels. Much of the merchandise in the shops and on the starship lots was made up of the worldly possessions of those who fell foul of the Hut clan or simply weren't careful enough around Bilbosa's locals. However, large and well stocked though it was, Bilbosa wasn't a place to do business. For that, visitors to Nal Hutta needed to look to the sky. Closely resembling a negative version of Coruscant, the urbanized Nar Shaddaa, or Smuggler's Moon, was the largest satellite of Nal Hutta and was, quite possibly, the most disreputable and outright dangerous place in the galaxy. While Coruscant, the capital world of the galaxy for so many centuries, might have been said to have something of a crime problem, it was clear that Nar Shaddaa had no problem at all with crime. The population embraced every sort of illegal activity, almost entirely free from any interference from law enforcement or officials from whoever ran the galactic government, be it the Republic, Empire, or New Republic. The Hut clan, which made the moon its home, maintained only the lightest touch, just enough to ensure they got their cut from any deals or transactions. Most beings understood that staying on the good side of the huts was essential, if far from a guarantee of safety. Much like Coruscant, the original surface of Nar Shaddaa had been lost under buildings for centuries. Unlike the galactic capital, though, Nar Shaddaa depravity and defilement wasn't restricted to the lower levels. Everywhere was polluted, everywhere was dangerous. However, everywhere also presented limitless opportunities for those uh, e- tough enough and smart enough to exploit them. Factories, workshops, and every other form of heavy industry proliferated. Legitimate and illegitimate businesses operated side by side. Leisure zones offered the best gambling facilities and the most exotic, if dubious, entertainment in the galaxy. The Smuggler's Moon was divided unofficially between various Hut crime lords and other powerful criminal cartels and gangs, presiding over a distinctly shady population. The capital, Hutta Town, was made up of huge tower blocks thrusting up into the brown, polluted air. Filling every available space between the buildings was a patchwork of teetering shanty town structures called sky slums. Illuminating it all were bright neon signs and hollow displays. Transports filled the skies, not restricted to docking areas and certainly not bound by any engine emission controls. Garbage barges also flitted around the buildings, regularly overflowing with Dianoga infested water waste. The people who paid for their services didn't care that their rubbish fell on others, just that it was taken somewhere else. Now, in Legends, they had there's a bit about the Battle of Nar Shaddaa. So, if you were familiar with any of the previous Han Solo exploits, then you would probably be familiar with this. Either that it was in a comic book or something like that. But again, part of Legends, not part of canon anymore. But we'll go through it. For all the conflict and division, for all the backstabbing and double dealing, there was a stubbornly independent streak that bound the people who called the smuggler's moon home together, a bizarre camaraderie that united them against any who sought to interfere with their freedom to cheat and murder each other. This was demonstrated during the Imperial era after Emperor ordered Moff Sarn Shield to impose Imperial authority on all of Hutt space. Shield decided to destroy the smuggler's moon to disrupt the Hutt's illegal operations and charged Admiral Winston Grelax with the task. However, concerned by Moff Shield's ambitions, the Emperor contacted Grelax directly and demanded that any assault on Nar Shaddaa fail, with the Hutts also offering the Admiral a huge bribe to do exactly the same thing. Grelax stood ready to lose in as dignified a way as possible. Unfortunately for him, the defense of Nar Shaddaa, organized by Han Solo and Lando Calrissian and other smugglers, proved to be more determined and skilled than anticipated. The Empire lost more than half its attack force, giving Admiral Grelax a more genuine excuse to retreat than he intended. The people of Nar Shaddaa were victorious and mollified by an increase in tax revenue from the Hutts. The Empire left the smuggler's moon alone. So there you go, a little bit of Legends action. Evasive maneuvers, going to ground. So we haven't had a decent secrets of space flight for a while, and we're kind of back with that. So sometimes the best way for a captain to ensure that his or her ship and crew survive flight to fight another day is to perform the ultimate evasive maneuver, going to ground. Whether it is a spur of the moment decision or a long calculated strategic move, going to ground is often the best way for a starship to disappear from the sensor displays of an enemy by seemingly vanishing from the universe. It is an age-old tactic borrowed from the natural world. A starship limping out of a dogfight to land on a friendly or out-of-the-way world is in essence the modern equivalent of a wounded animal rushing to the safety of its burrow, to hide until it's safe to venture out. Han Solo and Chewbacca earned themselves a reputation for being able to vanish when the heat was on, making the Millennium Falcon disappear from the established trade routes for galactic weeks or even months at a time. Decades of working together meant that they established a good understanding of when it was wise to go to ground. But like any evasive maneuver where they took their trusty ship depended on the situation they found themselves in. Ground rules. There was more to going to ground than simply landing. However, and this was proved more dramatically during the Galactic Civil War when the Millennium Falcon went to ground in something of a hurry on the fourth moon of the planet Yavin with a rescued rebel princess aboard. It was an uninhabited moon rarely included on official maps, and the combination of a remote location and a friendly welcome from the Rebel Alliance meant it seemed set for the perfect evasion. However, not long after the Falcon's pilot watched the happy reunion between Leia and the Alliance High Command, the alarm was raised. Solo had taken his ship to ground successfully enough, but had failed to sweep it for homing beacons, and in so doing had led the Empire to the rebels. Even a pilot as cunning as Solo made mistakes from time to time. Best laid plans. In ideal circumstances, the starship pilot wishing to disappear will be able to call in a friendly world or sanctuary. Pilots that find themselves needing to do so often will build up a list of contacts to call on in times of need. Han Solo thought he was doing this by making Lando Calrissian's Cloud City on Bespin. Sometimes, however, an unfamiliar or uncharted landing spot will be used, and this, naturally, holds an element of risk. Among the most famous examples of why it pays to be sure where you are landing is the story of Millennium Falcon escapes in the asteroid field surrounding Hoth. With a damaged hyperdrive, Solo was forced to go to ground in a somewhat rushed and improvised manner, hiding the ship in what he thought was an asteroid. While the tactic worked, screening the Falcon from the pursuing Imperials, it turned out the cave in which they found themselves was in fact the mouth of a giant space slug, forcing the ship into a hasty exit. The encounter over Hoth was not the first time that the Falcon had got into trouble with going to ground, however. In an Alliance mission to destroy the Imperial's largest munitions factory, we talked about this one a few weeks ago, I think. Weapons Factory Alpha on Simoon 1, Chewbacca set the ship down undetected in one of the factory moon's mini junkyards, ready to spirit the rebel strike team away once their mission was complete. However, he hadn't counted on the presence of the moon's native scavengers, a group of which went to work dismantling the ship from the outside. After a series of confrontations, first by C-3PO, who was promptly taken hostage by the scavengers and dismantled, and then more successfully by Chewbacca, the ship was repaired in the nick of time and managed to escape the moon with the Rebel Strike team on board. And finally, our behind the scenes here, Hoth and Lando Kadar. In the original story treatment of The Empire Strikes Back, the crew of the Millennium Falcon escaped the battle at the Rebel Alliance base and make it safely into hyperspace. On arriving at the rendezvous with the Rebel fleet, they find Imperial ships have gotten there first, so escape into the nearby asteroid field. Having gone to ground once in the asteroids, Han evades the Imperials and tries again on Hoth, the initial name for the gas giant that became Bespin. The Falcon leaves the asteroids without issue. There was no space slug, with Han sitting in search of an old smuggling contact called Lando Kadar. The second draft of the script included Han's bold, evasive tactic to avoid detection by hiding on the hull of the Star Destroyer, while the third added Boba Fett following the Falcon as it left. There you go. That's everything for this issue 81. And in issue 82, we're going to get the next part of our plating. So we'll be able to get that put uh, onto our framework. If we've got all the framework here, it doesn't look like we have it all. We're going to have a second part of our framework too. So I'm assuming we're going to be putting on these details here, but we'll find out when we get a lot of screws and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see how issue 82 comes out. With that, I want to say thank you very much, everybody, for watching, and may the Force be with you always.